Hello, everyone. My name is Leslie Campos, and I'm a member of Group One. My other group members are Karen Wang, Paul Gunther Moore, Nicoletta Romano, and our topic was digital library interfaces and user platforms. My focus for the project is user experience for public libraries. And the reason why I chose this topic is because I work in public libraries and I'm constantly being informed about um, patron feedback with regard to things about the site that need improvement or things that patrons love about the site. So I wanted to take the opportunity to learn a little bit about user experience design and some of the guiding principles that guide the practice and how it's used for public libraries. So the basic definition of user experience is UX focuses on having a deep understanding of users, what they need, what they value, their abilities, and also their limitations. It also takes into account the business goals and objectives of the group managing the project. UX best practices promote improving the quality of the user's interaction with and perceptions of your product and any related services. So user-centered design elements. There are five key principles for user experience design, and they are hierarchy, which relates to information architecture and how content is organized. And the image on the right is a basic um, diagram of a hierarchy of a website. Consistency. So patrons and users of various digital platforms in general like when interfaces are similar to each other because they're able to navigate them easier because they're familiar with them. Confirmation, which is before a significant action, there's an option to reverse that action. So, a good example would be if you're trying to put a payment through on a site and you get that pop up that wants to confirm that transaction. There's user control, and that's the abilities for users to recover from errors and traverse back and forth through the hierarchy of the site. And lastly, accessibility, which are accommodations for users that are disabled. Now, this was a really interesting graphic that helped me to understand the facets that go into designing a site and some of the concepts that UX developers examine. The first is whether the information on your site is useful and will it fulfill the needs of the user. Usable, which means the site must be easy to use and understand. Desirable, which applies to any images or any branding you're using, whether or not it's evoking the proper emotion. Findable, which means whether or not your content the site of that you're navigating is easily browsed or searched. Accessible, content needs to be accessible to people with disabilities. And credible, which talks about trust and whether or not the way your site is constructed evokes the emotion of trust and whether or not the information on your site is verifiable and credible. This particular graphic was created in 2004 by Peter Morville. So if we're talking about um, library websites, we're talking about digital collections, and there are five elements that comprise content, which is system architecture, content digitization, metadata development and application, user interface design, and digital preservation. For the scope of my project, I focused on metadata development and application. Metadata development for the user is what makes resources discoverable. So, descriptions must be concise and easily interpreted by the user. A good interface will be able to emulate indexes of books or catalogs of journals or artworks or various different artifacts equally well. A good index will combine many elements from many resources by prioritizing the carefully curated metadata source. So, in terms of the user, when a patron is using a public library website, they're usually performing one of two actions. They're usually browsing or searching. Browsing implies that the user is just exploring casually, while searching means that the user has a pretty good sense of what they're looking for, if not exactly what they're looking for. So, in terms of searching, descriptive summaries, documentation of authorship, control vocabularies for genre and subject, all keep all help with grouping materials so that um, the user can perform a keyword search. So, if a user is searching, more than likely they're using a keyword search to find their resources. In terms of browsing, it would be a different environment altogether. So, browsing would require resources to be collocated together and include a lot of contextual information. For example, if someone was browsing football and they came across a particular player that they liked, that background information would be provided with figures on stats, lifestyle, teams, years active, information like that. So likewise, a list of sub collections. They would be organized in a similar way to engage interest in the browsing patron and lead them to other topics they may want to explore. So I came across this really interesting study done by Pratt UX design students in 2018, and the study was done in a local public library, and they did an environmental scan and interviewed some patrons and found that the users had the following concerns. Users feel lost because basic services are too complicated and there's a lack of directions. Users became frustrated when looking up books or events online because it took too many clicks to get them to the resource, so there were too many discovery layers. And users had a hard time when browsing. So, in other words, they wanted recommendations to help them tailor their search. So, at the conclusion of the study, the students came up with a few ideas on some possible redesigns that could help users have a better experience. And the options were self curation, which would be the use of filters that saved searches, so recommendations that they would receive would be on searches they did in the past, or it would have the capability of um, comparing their profiles to profiles similar to theirs and then making recommendations that way. The shortened onboarding process, which gave patrons the ability to skip steps and just fill out the most important information and come back at a later time to finish the form. And lastly, the use of a dashboard, um, and that it would be the simple component designed for important account information and any alerts and things like that. So the two conclusions they came to are two things that I hear often with regard to the website: shortening the onboarding process and the dashboard. So I thought that was really interesting. And lastly, I looked into some accessibility options for those with disabilities, and they're here. I won't read through all of them because I've gone over my time already, but um, use of color and contrast, design focus states, which are special borders around form fields, and um, buttons that help patrons focus in on something if they're having a visual disability and unable to focus. So providing those borders helps them focus. The use of descriptive text or images and other visual elements, instructions on form fields, and lastly, keyboard navigation options. So those are for people who have trouble that cannot use the scrolling option and would need to use the keyboard to navigate a website. And the image of the young lady on the right would probably be a good example of someone who could not scroll and would need those special accommodations. So, just to conclude, these are the resources that I used for my site. And now I'm going to move on and just give you a brief look at the pages that I constructed. Thank you. So this is our WordPress. Um, these are, this is our menu, and these are the pages that I've been working on so far. On this page, I talk about the overview of the user experience for the public library. And then on my second page, I talk about the facets of the user experience. And I provide some diagrams. This is a very short page, but my last page goes into a little bit more in-depth analysis on user needs and challenges. And that's about it. Thank you so much for your time in viewing my video. See you in class on Monday. Thank you for watching.